Welcome to the African News Review podcast, where we cut through the noise and get to the truth. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and each week we are here to challenge the biases, prejudices, and misinformation in the Western press about Africa. Using historical context and contemporary insights, we set the record straight and reclaim the narrative. Tune in every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we uncover the real stories and reshape the conversations about Africa. This is the African News Review podcast, reclaiming Africa's narrative, one story at a time. Yes, greetings, and welcome to another episode of African News Review. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and with me, as usual, is my sister from another mother, Fubara, Eneli Esquire, co-hosts of Women and Resistance, and also the singular host of Rethinking Freedom. Welcome, sister.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you. Welcome back. Yeah, he needs no further introduction. The author of Manufacturing Hate, editor, Black Star News, and a regular contributor to African News Review, Comrade Milton Allimadi.
Asante sana.
Welcome, comrade.
Thank you.
So, as it's become custom, news from where you at. I will start with the sister first, because I think if we allow the good comrade to go first, he might take it global.
Well, everything at this point, we understand that the world is shrinking. And so everything that happens in one place affects another, whether we want to recognize that or not. Of course, I'm in Texas in the United States of America. And this past week, we had a shooting at an ICE detention center. The captured alleged shooter is a white young man. They're claiming that the bullets had anti-ICE written on it. Not sure what that means. He has to be the worst shot in the world because supposedly he was the narrative from the FBI's. He was attacking the ICE agents, but he killed an immigrant who is not white and shot two others who were not white and did not so much as nick any of the ICE agents.
Right.
So I'm not really sure who his target was based on his results, but we continue to see white men unleashing violence on the rest of the world, and particularly here in the United States of America. So that is, and of course, as soon as the shooting was announced, the Vice President of the United States, who I guess is setting himself up to take over from Trump, signs of decline continue to show themselves. He immediately blamed it on the quote-unquote left and attacked Democrats. And there's a whole narrative now about Democrats really being domestic terrorists and as such to be targeted. And I believe this morning, the felon-in-chief, using the new governing tool, I guess, which is Truth Social, put out a tweet disparaging Portland, Oregon, and commanding or authorizing Pete Hegseth, the newscaster turned defense secretary, to utilize whatever troops he needs to go in and take over Portland. So we are seeing America attack its own in broad daylight, unprovoked. There are no insurrections, no issues going on in Portland, Oregon that should warrant this kind of response. And at the same time, just in the neck of the woods of the United States as a whole, Pete Hegseth has thought it wise to command all of the leading generals across the United States of America, wherever they were stationed in the world, to attend. I believe there are 800 that have been summoned to attend a meeting in Virginia.
To come in.
Listen, I'm no major military strategist, but on no level does it make sense that you would gather all of your top generals in one place and announce it to the world that you are gathering all of your top generals in one place. And the question is, to what end? Are they there to swear an oath to the president as opposed to the Constitution? What is going to be, what comes out of this? And if he has his way, no reporter can report on anything except for the authorized narrative from the Department of Defense. So freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, we can go ahead and shred those aspects of the so-called U.S. Constitution.
Wow. Brother Milton.
Yeah.
Try and beat that, please.
Okay, so remember how Britain officially became not Great Britain? Remember what year it was exactly officially? You in the UK, you should remember that incident, right?
Yes.
The Suez Crisis, 1956-57. When Britain thought it was still an imperial power, colluded with France and Israel to invade Egypt because Nasser had nationalized the Suez Canal. And the U.S. President Eisenhower said, back off. And Britain was stunned. Wait a minute, we're in this together. The United States said, no, we are not. That was the official end of Britain as a global power. I think the official end of the United States came with Donald Trump's speech at the UN. First of all, members, the South countries just shrugged it off. Nobody was embarrassed by it. He was the one that ended up embarrassing the country. And in terms of what he said, I didn't even bother listening to the whole thing. But he starts off by complaining to a global audience about the escalator stopping. And if him and his wife were not fit, they would have fallen. And then he's complaining about the teleprompter. And then, from then on, it was just downhill all the way. Well, it never had a chance of going anywhere anyway, right? Bashing the previous U.S. administration as that is the setting at the UN. Who wants to hear about that at the UN, right? And then how everything has been up since he became president. The stock market is up, and all of you are benefiting from it, is what he's saying, as if all those delegates are buying shares on Wall Street. And then his claim of solving a global conflict, and the one he did, seven, and the ones he did in the past, he didn't even get a thank you call from the UN, he said.
Yes.
I'm telling you, these are, obviously it's still a colossal military power, right?
And he was going to take care of that teleprompter. Someone was in trouble. Someone's going to get fired.
Absolutely. And he said that, right? That person is going to get in trouble. Think about that, So that to me is the official, I would say that's the date that historians would recall, right? The evidence is already manifest everywhere. The economic decline, the rise of other nations coming together like Brazil, India, the BRICS countries, So it was appropriate that a person of that lack of caliber was the one that gets to address the UN at this unique time in history. Of course, as the sister pointed out, it's going to be very rough for the next many months and the next couple of years as well. The U.S. has to adjust itself to this new realization. I think it took Britain decades. Britain had to go to invade an empty island called the Falklands. I remember a couple of decades ago. To still say, we are still relevant. We're still relevant. Very soon, the U.S. will start engaging those types of activities as well. So that's my observation from domestically.
Okay, so thank you for sharing. In the UK, the idea of global surveillance continues. The Prime Minister muted the idea of having a digital ID for every Briton in the United Kingdom. So basically, that ID will hold all your data. So at a push of a button, they've got all your information. Now, the problem with that idea is it's not going to be managed by governments. It's possibly going to be managed by a
private
corporate,
company.
Thank you very much. And a private company had already been fingered as being already in place to run similar type systems, which is Palantir. And so for people who don't know what Palantir is or what the company is about, you could Google it, and let's just say, don't do it while you're holding a hot cup of coffee, because you might scold yourself. That said, the news of the world has Africa plastered all over it. And so we go to the UN General Assembly, which marked 80 years. I mean, that comes with a whole lot of problems itself. But the first story comes from Deutsche Welle, and it is that the Africans want things to change at the UN. And so the headline reads, UN General Assembly, what African leaders want. Leaders from across Africa has renewed their calls for a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of Israeli hostages held by Hamas. They also demand a permanent African representation on the UN Security Council. And this year's theme at the UN General Assembly sounded more than ambitious. It's titled Leaving No One Behind, Acting Together for the Advancement of Peace, Sustainable Development, and Human Dignity for Present and Future Generations. I would have to ask you, what's your takeaway, considering you must have heard some, if not all of them, all 11 hours of the speeches? So I'll start with the sister first. What's your major takeaway?
Just taking a quick break here on the African News Review podcast, but don't go anywhere. If you're enjoying our deep dive into the real stories behind the headlines, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern, we're here to debunk the myths and bring you the truth about Africa. Want to help spread the word? Share this podcast with your friends and leave us a review. It goes a long way in helping others discover the real Africa. Without further ado, let's get back to setting the record straight.
Yes, some people watch TV shows, and I have no problems with that. But I was certainly watching and listening to quite a number of the speakers, the leaders who spoke at the UN General Assembly. He's not African, but I have to highlight him because he ended up then getting his visa revoked and kicked out of the country.
Right. Yeah.
President Petro from Colombia.
Gustavo Petro
spoke truth to power. He minced no words at all in addressing the idiocy of Donald Trump and the path that the United States is following. He raised the issue of young people from Colombia being blown up, murdered at sea with no proof that they had committed any crimes, no jury, no trial, no nothing, just murdered. He talked about the fact that the real drug dealers live in Miami and in New York and in all of these places and are coddled by the United States. And he talked about the interference of the United States, Donald Trump in particular, in the affairs of Colombia. And he really made a point, since there's so much anti-immigration talk, that there needs to be a concern about what is driving immigration. And that it's poverty. A lot of this poverty is driven by the policies of nations, the policies of the United Nations, the fact that the United Nations is largely ineffective, but also the IMF, the World Bank, and of course, climate change. So I just wanted to highlight him. He later on spoke at an event in New York, and based on that, the absolutely spineless, I wouldn't even call him a human being. I don't know what he is. I never want to really disparage people, but when you do not act like you are humane, I have to question. Marco Rubio immediately put to use the power of the United States and had him revoked his visa. He had to leave. The same way they prevented a representative from Palestine to come to the country anyway to speak at the UN. National Assembly, General Assembly, which raises the issue of how is this a United Nations when a host nation can unilaterally decide who can come in and therefore have access to power to speak, all of that. Now, getting back to the African leaders, I often disparage the AU because they are, we know, funded by outsiders who do not have our best interests. But I was pleasantly surprised to see all of the African leaders I listened to on script in terms of Ghanaian's president talked about Africa is the future. Look at the figures and look at where the growth is and look at who's going to have the youngest population, not to talk about the mineral resources that we have. He said it the first time, nobody really responded until he said it. He said, I'm saying it again for those in the back. And then there was applause when he said Africa is the future, or the future is Africa, is how he put it. But they're all calling for, based on just sheer numbers, that Africa should be represented on the United Nations Security Council. Mm-hmm. For those of you who don't know, there are 5 permanent members of the Security Council and there are 14 non-permanent members. And the 5 have veto power, which means at any point in time, one of them can just say, yeah, we don't care if all the other countries of the world voted a certain way, we can unilaterally say no. And there is no provision to override such veto. So they're asking for Africans, and even that term asking, anytime you have to beg these people for something. But anyway, they're asking for African nations to have at least 2 representatives on the Security Council. They're asking for reform, reset is how many of them put it, where the rules, the veto power rules are changed. They are asking for the change in how monies are divvied up, if you will, and the rubrics that is used, because right now it really penalizes countries in quote unquote the global south. And one of the leaders talked about the fact that looking at a certain part of money, like 62% went to the wealthiest countries. And then all the other middle and lower income countries shared 38%, which makes ridiculous sense. Of course, Mia Mottley, as we have come to expect her to do, brought all the smoke, all the facts, all the fire. She was absolutely amazing in how even toned she was, but how she just really hit on all the major points that needed to be addressed. And so, yes, what we're hearing from African leaders is we're no longer going to be marginalized. And they talked about how the structure of the UN today still largely reflects what the world looked like in 1945 and has not moved on with the times. And some of them even said, hey, just like there was a League of Nations before the United Nations, but it became obsolete. If the United Nations does not make some very specific changes right now, United Nations itself would be obsolete. And of course, the theme was better together. And so there, anyone who hasn't watched the speeches, we are global citizens. You should go and pay attention because these leaders are also sounding the alarm on climate change and the fact that we only have a small window to react properly. And of course, the idiot in chief in the White House was the only leader there who was questioning science, who was just going to pull stuff out of his behind and completely disregard all the science that exists. He made a total idiot of himself and the United States on that stage. And some people were, very boldly called him out on it. Now, countries like Cambodia came in and kissed his butt and announced that they had nominated him for the Nobel Prize. That's the other thing, Comrade Allimadi. He was making a case for, I don't really need the prize, but I should get the prize and all of that. I mean, absolutely horrendous performance. But yeah, let me pass it over to our comrade.
Okay. All right. So what I liked the most was the momentum that is now building up against the genocide. Palestinian people. And so, we have to commend South Africa for really getting the ball rolling with this lawsuit at the World Court, International Court of Justice, because then that built up momentum for the International Criminal Court to take action. And then that built up momentum for all these countries to start talking about wanting to recognize the state of Palestine. And ultimately, that's what many of them did. And I like the fact that the guy, as of now, Netanyahu really led his country to become global pariah. I like the fact that all those leaders walked out when he came to speak. I like the fact that you see protests in many countries now, including in Italy, massive protests. Because at the end of the day, human beings care about other human beings, whether they're non-Europeans, children are children. And that is now resonating. I like the fact that Ramaphosa was very strong in denouncing Israel, using the genocide word consistently.
Yes.
And very boldly. So to me, that was perhaps one of the greatest achievements of this particular session. The momentum is not going back. When you have the president of Colombia joining people outside, right, out of the UN to speak like that, and that resonates really globally. You can say, okay, the U.S. has my back. The U.S. has my back. Number one, it does not mean the people in the United States agree with what the U.S. is doing, having your back with a blanket check. We see people like, Tucker Carlson, or people like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, now openly breaking away from that. So we are going to see changes, whether Netanyahu likes it or not, and whether Trump likes it or not. Now, in terms of the veto thing, I actually was listening to the Norwegian president, and I prefer his proposal, actually, at the end of the day. He said no country should have veto power. Yeah. And then I thought about it. I said, wow, that is actually what the UN was set up to be.
Exactly.
So that the majority opinion of the global countries could prevail. So now you have to persuade by making the best argument and let people vote in the General Assembly, and that's it. So because now you give Africa one or two vetoes, what is that going to accomplish? They're certainly not going to push for something that the U.S. cannot veto, you see? So it would be like a status symbol. Oh, yeah, now we also in the Security Council with permanent votes. But if you really want the UN to become effective, as people once envisioned that it might, then let the General Assembly prevail. Let even the smallest countries, by virtue of having that vote, just like the small states in this country, right? Every state, you get senators, not saying, oh, this state is too small. You don't deserve to have, a seat in the Senate. So the UN, I think, should go back. And I hope that proposal gains some momentum. Of course, I think the countries with the permanent seats would rather prefer to give Africa 2 seats than to say, okay, nobody should have veto power, Otherwise, that would be the best solution, actually.
For me,
I do want to say that I appreciated the fact that although many of the speakers focused on the genocide in Gaza, quite a few of them also brought up the Sudan and brought up Congo as well.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. You're correct.
In raising those issues.
Thank you for
bringing
that. Of
course, the Ukraine war was something that was raised, and Mia Motley in the past has talked about how that war is draining resources that could be used to advance development and address climate change. So I think our speakers, the Grenada leader who spoke so eloquently, he's a very young man, spoke very eloquently about education and tying it to opportunity. And he talked about some kids barely having access to education or being in buildings that are run down or being bombed, referring to Gaza as well. And then other kids are in schools with state-of-the-art education and AI and all of that, and just the inequities that presents. And so really worth listening to. Some of the countries have some really great leaders who are thinking through things like people who have studied and have an understanding. And then we have the absolute bumbling piece of, SHIT, that was elected president of this country. Actually, There is a Briton. I know this is not one of the things that you had on your list, but I have to, if you permit me. I don't have to, but if you permit me,
Go
I
on.
have to read a scorching, I don't know if you would call it an editorial, that was posted about Trump, if I can find it quickly here. Yes. Let me just read this. And the British absolutely do have a way with words, and this was crazy. So this is by Oliver Kornetsky, and it was published on August 18, 2025. And he said, "Behold, the festering carcass of American rot, shoved into an ill-fitting suit. The sleaze of a con man, the cowardice of a draft dodger, the gluttony of a parasite, the racism of a Klansman, the sexism of a back alley creep, the ignorance of a barstool drunk, and the greed of a hedge fund ghoul, all spray painted orange and paraded like a prize hog at a county fair. Not a president, not even a man, just the diseased distillation of everything this country swears it isn't, but has always been. Arrogance dressed up as exceptionalism, stupidity passed off as common sense, cruelty sold as toughness, greed exalted as ambition, and corruption worshipped like gospel. It is America's shadow made flesh, a rotten pumpkin idol, proving that when a nation kneels before money, power, and spite, it doesn't just lose its soul. It shits out this bloated obscenity and calls it a leader." I don't know that I have read a more scathing and a more accurate description of the felon-in-chief. Well done, Oliver Kornetsky.
That's from the land of Shakespeare. Of course, yeah. I mean, the same can be said for some people in Maine. Britain too has its own share of those kind of rotting carcasses that are walking around, prancing and considering themselves leaders. Nigel Farage being one of them. Your
sister Kemi being one of them, isn't she from your area?
I mean, Kemi is an excuse for a leader. I'm minded to say I have to give, of all the leaders that spoke, and it pains me to say this, but I have to give him his flowers. Cyril Ramaphosa touched on all the ills.
Yes, he did.
He spoke about Gaza and the reason why South Africa had to bring the case. He talked about the impunity that followed the October 7 events. He talked about trade being used as a weapon. Yeah? So he also talked about environmental pledges that the so-called advanced North are not living up to and how it impacts the people in the global South. He then talked about the security reforms. And just when I thought he was done, he then mentioned Western Sahara.
Right.
And I'm like, wow. Because for some people that don't know, Western Sahara, I mean, let's say to a lesser degree, is Africa's Gaza. Because we're talking about settler colonialism here. This is the attempt at wiping out a people by Morocco. Again, sanctioned by the United States. That yes, you want that land, you can go have it.
And France.
And France, yeah. You could go have it. So the fact that Cyril Ramaphosa was able to touch on, because when I heard Western Sahara, I was like, whoa, rewind. What did you just say? And he laid it all out there. And I'm like, yes. And then Mia Motley, when she was finishing her speech, she said something. She said, and I want to quote her words exactly. She said, if a 6-year-old can summon the will to push against their worst fears, and she was talking about Rajab Hind, the 6-year-old girl that was trapped in the car that the Israelis launched 435 bullets into. But she could still make that call that she was here and that the world should not forget her. What is our excuse?
While she was carrying her younger sibling.
Yes. What is our excuse? And
that's powerful. I mean, I'm getting chills just listening to you retell it again. That's very powerful.
So when she said it, I was like, whoa, that just sums. But then again, the we have to give all of them their flowers, but
here's my little issue though. Absolutely proud of them. Listen to Shatima from Nigeria, all of that. And then I said, so African leaders, why are you not addressing your internal issues with the same brilliance and gusto and historical understanding as you have shown on this stage?
Because many of them are different.
I mean, we can look to the UN and because it's a global, it's a world. We everything impacts everybody, but can we also strengthen what and who we are within the continent? I mean, something as basic as no more visas, that we can travel in and out and we can building trade routes amongst ourselves. You don't need an outsider to help you make that decision. You don't need the UN for that. And so I applauded their courage and their understanding of the issues. And then I said, okay, so what's stopping you from showing up differently in your own area? Ramaphosa, you know how much money you've made in South Africa. How are you ensuring an infrastructure for the young people? So I would just say to the African leaders, kudos. Now get home and get to work.
Right. So I think we should separate them and thank what they said. I'm endorsing what you're saying, but I'm saying that we should say it, that they said the right thing on behalf of our countries. But as individuals, they have failed to deliver domestically. And while I praise them for their conduct at the UN, I have no problem advocating for their removal also back in Africa. There's absolutely no contradiction at all, because they were not speaking as individuals in any case. They were speaking on behalf of the countries. So that's a South African position. Well and good. But of course, but Ramaphosa at least is in a country that still respects the Constitution and the term limits. So, but the others, where they're still, contesting for power, shredding the Constitution, behaving pretty much like the President of the United States, And then in terms of Ramaphosa, I also totally agree, but I would encourage him to stop using the term Western Sahara. Just like South Africa used to refer to Namibia, Southwest Africa, with the South African imposed colonial name. They call themselves Sahrawi Democratic Republic. So if you're embracing them, call them, so that would be the only correction. Call them what they call themselves.
And some of your listeners may remember we covered this issue a couple of sessions ago, maybe. I think when we're talking about it's definitely about Morocco and the dam.
Yeah, the football shirts. The football shirts.
The same issue. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then finally, of course, this is what it will take only the type of the leaders that they have in the Alliance of Sahel states to do something like this. They must officially leverage their resources. If they do that, by the next General Assembly, they would get a permanent seat on the Security Council. Even though now, after listening to the Norwegian, I'm no longer a big fan of that. But if they really want it, they should leverage their resources. They should say every African country that has cobalt, that has uranium, that has coltan, that has the rare earth minerals that they want, we will not make it available to you unless you commit that at the next General Assembly, the 81st session, we're going to have the 2 permanent seats that we're talking. Otherwise, you're going to be talking like that for a very long time.
Because they have been making this call for a very long time. So, I have to ask you this, Comrade Milton.
Yes.
So did you listen to the Ugandan representative? Because I didn't.
No, I did not. I think they sent the prime minister, but I did not. But I don't think I missed much. Honestly, because Uganda, badly, not only because the guy's been there for 40 years, The guy has allowed many generations of Ugandan potential leaders to emerge. And that is the worst thing. By suppressing, we never know what might have transpired in the last 40 years, right?
Yeah.
That's number one. Number two, but he is the ultimate hypocrite. Remember a few shows ago, I said what he was saying about, I never blamed Europeans for colonizing Africa. If you're stupid, you should be taken as slave and all that. All right. So remember a couple of shows ago, we discussed the Ugandan, I think she's now even the whole president of the International Court of Justice. The one who was saying, God is telling her to do this for Israel and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Remember, she was also one, I think, but maybe the only one, or maybe the only one who voted against humanitarian aid, not voting against the lawsuit filed by South Africa. Even Israel did not have a representative, but Israel had an advocate, a lawyer who was advocating Israel's interest in the proceedings. Even that advocate was advocating and supporting humanitarian aid at that time for Gaza. But the Ugandan voted against it. And she's not acting independently. So even though, as I explained, the Ugandan government might say, we don't understand why, she doesn't represent us. She's a part of the UN now, so we don't control her. But of course they control her, because all they have to do is have a third person call and say, we know your relatives live here and there. We know the young ones go to this school and all. That's all they need to do. Otherwise, a rational human being would not be behaving the way she did. And you can't get all the way to that level to become a judge without being a rational human being. So even though I have no direct evidence, circumstantially, I'm willing to believe, this is what's going on. Yeah. So the prime minister, I think her mandate would be say something, and I'm going to go back and listen to it and then maybe confirm it next week. Say something that is appealing to the man in the White House. Because Uganda has elections in January, and that's why they wanted to take Abrego. Because then, after he steals the election, if the U.S. would say, hey, he would say, wait, I'm doing you guys a favor. Send more of the people you're expelling. I'll take them. So that card didn't work out. We took that off the table by kept exposing the human rights abuses. They said, okay, we're not sending Abrego there. So now he's trying to find another way to cement that neo-colonial connection with the U.S.
You sort of jumped the gun with regards to the story, so I might as well go for it. And it's that Reuters says Ugandan pop star Bobby Wine cleared to challenge again, aging incumbent again. And it goes on, and it says Ugandan opposition leader is turning up to run against your man. So, you've read the story. What is your take on it?
Right. So I'll just give 2 quick points, and then we can go to the sister and see her take on it. At one point, Reuters has a Ugandan journalist who writes most of the stories. And Reuters, of course, you can't be openly biased in favor of Museveni. So their stories always sound like, okay. They're sort of hitting him, exposing what's going on. But in every one of and his name is Rodney, I forget his last name. In every one of his stories, he would always have a reference to Museveni remains popular in the urban areas. And our cities are really packed with population. And so people say, why is that important? That's important to make it plausible that he might win elections, you see? So in every article he writes about Museveni, he always has that sentence. And, as somebody who critiques, Western media, after a while, you develop the eye to pick up things quickly. And how did I know that he would copy and paste it verbatim? Because he did it in 3 articles and forgot to correct a spelling of one word. So the same word was misspelled in 3 different articles spread over more than a year period, right? So I tweeted about that and I pointed that out. and I copied it to his editor. His editor is based in South Africa, a guy I met also many years ago. I said, this is not a random sentence. This is regime propaganda to rationalize election theft. They've done it in the past, and they're going to do it again in the future. So now I notice this article says by Reuters. It doesn't have Rodney's name. I said, okay, maybe now either Rodney's trying to hide himself or they're trying to hide him in the background. So I read this article very carefully.
Okay.
And first of all, the headline, pop star, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, he's just a pop star anyway, right? Number one. And nobody knows, people will not catch that, right?
Yeah.
And then now, instead of saying Museveni is popular in urban areas, so I noticed they removed that now. It doesn't appear in this article. But now they say Bobby Wine is popular in the ghettos where he grew up.
He's a ghetto king.
So now they say his support is confined to the ghettos. So if you ended up losing to Museveni, don't be shocked, right? So they flip the propaganda in a very clever way. And obviously, you can only pick this out by somebody who has followed them very carefully and consistency. And of course, I'm going to write to them about this and tweet about it later on. So thank you for focusing on this article. And then one final point. They say Muhoozi, the dictator's son, Uganda is considering him the vice dictator, said he tweeted a few months ago and boasted of having an opposition leader in his basement. And he even threatened to harm him. No! Shame on you, Reuters. Shame on you.
It actually happened.
He tweeted boasting that I've tortured him and posted a photo of him bloodied and being tortured. So Reuters, how dare you? You should be very much ashamed. And, if you're not watching this video, I'm going to make sure that I send you the link to Adesoji's program after this show. That's outrageous. Think about that. Yeah. Reuters previous stories, carried articles about Muhoozi boasting that he tortured this guy.
Yeah.
And in this particular article, it says he even threatened that he might harm him. So even though Rodney's name is not in this article, Rodney may not have written it, Rodney played a role, I believe at least, in the construction of this article. And I wasn't even aware of it until you brought this article up. So thank you for that, comrade.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. Sister?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with all the points that you made. So in dismissing him as a pop star, you don't talk about the fact that he was a member of parliament for 4 years.
Thank you.
Talk about the fact that he was actually the main opponent in the last presidential election. You don't focus on the shortcomings of Museveni or that his son is the head of this military arm that is unleashed and
actually promoted him to be commander of the entire army now.
Okay. So yeah, you're right. You have to read in between the lines to say what is not being said or what is being normalized.
Right.
What is it? But basically the headline itself is just, dismiss this guy. He's nobody.
He's just a pop star.
But of course, there's another guy who I guess he has not been cleared yet to run, Mubarak Munyagawa or Munyaga. Let me look at it again. Munyagwa. And he is promising that if he becomes elected as president of Uganda, he's going to replace Swahili with French because this is how it should be.
Yeah.
But then even as I was reading that article, I was just thinking about, the elitism of the classism and the issues of class within the African society, because by pitching it as the ghetto king versus those of us who are more refined, you see this class conflict as well. And elections, unfortunately, need money to run. And so if you kind of dog whistle to the elite, hey, this one is not one of you. You may dance to his music, but leave it at that. Just enjoy his music. But if he comes into power, he might change your level of comfort. So, stay with this guy who wants to be president into his 5th decade, something of that nature.
Right.
So We got, and I hope that when the AU comes together, that just as we were blasting the United Nations, that African leaders are having these conversations behind closed doors with each other, that we need to change how we show up.
No, they need to, because Cameroon has won on the 12th, and they're going to basically endorse this 92-year-old for another term. Ivory Coast has one later, also in October. Qatar, 83-year-old. And then of course Museveni has his scheduled election in January. So all these three, and all of them, and he's also 82 years old. So it's a major problem. And I hope that people take the model of Kenya. I think Kenya, with whatever shortcomings, the young people have really shown the formula for galvanizing over issues, the way they succeeded with the attempted tax hike and forced the government to roll that back, mobilizing on social media. So I hope that the young people in more African countries, including Uganda, can take that model as well.
And I also want to leave our audience with the fact that Museveni wrote a book in 1992 where he laid out the problem with Africa. And he said, and I quote,
tell people the title of the book.
But the title of the problem is Africa's Problems and something else. It was Africa's Problems. So
the title is, What is Africa's Problem?
What is Africa's problem? Yeah. What is Africa's problem? Chapter 2 is Africa, leadership.
Yep.
The problem with the first line of that chapter is the problem with Africa is that its leaders stay too long in power.
Yep.
So you're saying Reuters could have led with that line?
Oh, they never will. Not if Rodney is contributing.
Well, I guess it depends on what your definition of too long is.
Okay, I'm glad you said that, sister, because then later on he started being challenged. Everywhere he went, they would bring up that book. You know what he started saying? He said, I meant to say too long without being elected. I kid you not. Yeah, look it up.
I mean, it's fascinating. When I discovered that book,
he's something else.
Yeah, so, well, that's one to look out for. So the election is when again?
I think it's the 12th of January.
So the 12th of January. Okay. 12th of January.
I think Cameroon is also either 12th or 16th of October. And I think Cote d'Ivoire around the 24th or something like that.
Yeah, 24th of October is Cote d'Ivoire, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So you've got octogenarians and centurions running to be presidents. Oof. Yeah. Africans. So, yeah. Part of the fallout of the OAU conference was the issue of reparations. And for that story, we go to the Daily Telegraph, which is a British newspaper. It's titled, The Demand for Reparations by African Nation is a Shameless Attack on the Truth. And it's written by a author, Nigel Biggar. He's just released a book. I won't even ask you to go read that book. It's just nonsense. There was a time when the better off flaunted their status by buying mansions and driving fancy cars and wearing top hats. Today, privilege is commonly assumed to be shameful. Western elites is now preferred to sport superior moral status by championing fashionable, in inverted commas, progressive causes. These are the luxury beliefs because they cost the elite nothing while cost others a lot. One such is that of decolonization. And it then goes on, but here's the key part. Now, however, decolonization threatens to become very expensive indeed for exploiting the Western's performative orgy of self-flagellation. The African Union has joined the Caribbean community, CARICOM, in demanding reparations from Britain for its colonial crimes. CARICOM has already submitted its bill of 18 trillion. Let me get your take, because...
Please leave the article up.
Oh, okay. I'll also be minded that the good comrade will want to leave on the hour. So if it does, we'll continue
Then let him go first on this one then.
Let me bring you back up.
No, this one is an easy one, and I'm glad. No, he's just regurgitating the same column that I forget her name. Unfortunately, paralyzed Don Lemon with when he was still at CNN. I remember watching that interview, and she said, Don was pushing her on the whole issue of reparations. The justness of reparations, whether it's in the United States and Britain for its colonial crimes, and pre-colonial crimes.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, were you aware that it was actually the British fleet that was stopping the slave ships, intercepting them, and freeing people and taking them to places like Sierra Leone? Did you know that? Of course, Don Lemon did not know sufficient history. So it was paralyzed and ended up here. And then after that, she dominated the conversation.
Just for those listening who are ever in that situation, just quote Malcolm X. The fact that you put a knife in my back 6 inches and then you pull it out 3, I'm supposed to clap for you?
No, but it's even better than that. It's even better than that. I wish Don Lemon had read Eric Williams' book, Capitalism and Slavery. The British were doing that on behalf of British interests.
Exactly.
Because they had gone through plantation slavery. They used the wealth created by the enslaved Africans on the sugar plantations, the tobacco plantations, to build so much capital that they came up with a steam engine, right? They came up with manufacturing production. So now the industrial capitalists were the ones who are against the plantation owners and saying, wait a minute, we don't want you enslaving these Africans on your plantations. That's very selfish. We want cheap labor in our factories. We want to pay them wages, and then they can use the wages to buy our manufacturers. And that's why they sent their ships to stop slavery, so that they could escalate.
It wasn't altruistic? Is that your argument?
And sadly, Don Lemon had not read this book. So yes, these names like William Lloyd Garrison in the United States, like Wilberforce in Britain and all that, yes, they were important, but they were not the decisive factor. It was the industrial capitalists that said, no more slavery. You're cutting into our exponentially much higher profits that we're making from this type of production. So obviously, what's his name?
So wait a second. Are you arguing that using the cute term, the annexation of Lagos was just because they were trying to protect the people of Lagos from slavery? That was the sole purpose?
That's what Nigel is saying. That's what Nigel is saying, right? Nigel went further and said colonialism, number one, was to stop slavery. And then he's implying to civilize the Africans, right?
African, of course.
So, I mean, obviously, they wanted the people of Lagos also to become producers of cheap labor and consumers of their manufacture, which is exactly what happened. And here's just 2 more points quickly. If you are so kind to these Africans, so because you can't sleep because of their suffering as enslaved human beings, does it make sense that you would now move from enslaving them to colonizing them, bringing a new type of slavery? Does that make sense? Is there any consistency there? Is it even rational? Or is Nigel being completely irrational? Of course he is. And then the final point, he's complaining that these people are asking for reparations without mentioning the fact that the enslavers were compensated.
Yes.
And if you put it in US dollars, today would be close to $4 trillion US dollars. So in fact, these guys might be underestimating what they're owed, you see?
Payment was as recently as 10 years ago, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Wasn't it?
So this is another article that I also thank you for bringing up, because obviously I'm going to respond to Nigel. And if his publication doesn't publish it, it's fine. I'll publish it on Black Star,
Brother, when you respond, please make sure you send that to us so we can help get it out to other areas as well.
It's completely preposterous. But if you don't know, obviously, the background and the facts, then it sounds like, yeah, he's right.
Yeah. I mean,
say that for our readers, and this is across the board now with a lot of what we're reading and even just the statements being made by people, is that there's a total projection happening. It's almost like whatever they're saying, just understand that is whatever they're saying about you
is what they feel
is
about
what
them.
is really the truth about them.
Yeah.
So if you go back to that article,
very good.
Go back to the article, that first paragraph.
No, very good. I like that. It's just that really captures the explanation.
No, it's like when they say, oh, you're a thief. No. You know you're the thief. That's why you're trying to subterfuge and create some confusion. People are like,
no,
well, maybe
right. That is the terms to explain it.
See if you can pull up that article again. That very first
1 second.
Paragraph.
Yeah, 1 second. Let me go. The demand for reparation. Okay.
He tells us exactly what he's about. No, so it's the part that you didn't actually highlight. He says,
which defames
Britain's 400 years of colonial endeavor.
As a simple.
Wait, no. So it was just an endeavor, playing around with an entire continent.
As a simple.
Now, of course, he's separating this from also what they did in India.
Yeah.
Or in the Caribbean that really shows you altogether with it. But it's like he's just calling it an endeavor because no humans were involved. Then he said that we're trying to defame it as a simple litany of racism, exploitation, and oppression.
Yeah. So why are they not suing for defamation then?
Thank you. No. You are actually guilty of all of those things.
Right. No, this is a great article, so thank you for bringing that up.
So, like the good comrade said, to counter that article, please.
By the way, people should also look at when you're talking about that article, and you might even want to look at this one. Because they've continued this system, and that's what they were talking about at the UN General Assembly. They've continued this world management where they've set it up already, where they will always win and you will always be the ones that are exploited and extract. So it's called trilateralism, the Trilateral Commission and Elite Planning for World Management. This was from way back in my college days, but yeah.
So I would suggest, like the good comrade said, Eric Williams's Capitalism and Slavery, and also the interests, how the so-called reparations was paid to the enslavers. So this is by Michael Taylor. And then also how we got to the question of the United Nations. Please read Vijay Prasad's Washington Bullets, which is very short read, but this book is packed with so much information. It's titled The Washington Bullets.
Yeah, I like him. I like him a lot too. So, comrades, I have to run, but you continue the conversation, please. Continue informing our people. I will be with you next week, of course. I just have to complete some research for the professor I'm working with.
Okay, no problem.
So I'm going to leave the thing on to finish downloading later on.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Have a great week.
Yeah, thank you for coming through. Yeah. So, again, all these stories bears down on Africa's, how can I say it, our future, our past. The past, obviously, underpins what the future is. And from time to time, you have all these useful idiots pop up and just write a book and then tell us, oh, this is what you should now believe. And I'll be minded to say, for people who don't see this show, they'll probably run with his line of argument that, what are you doing? Why all of a sudden you've decided these people they were benevolent, they came to Africa. And it's usually Africans that will run with his narrative.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with, and I'm so glad that you brought this particular article up, because I think that has to do with our miseducation. And as John Henry Clark would say, like, your oppressors are never going to educate you to be able to liberate yourself. That's just not how it's going to work. And so it's easier for us to, based on how we've been socialized and educated, to believe in our own inferiority, to buy into our own complicity. And particularly in those countries where there was indirect rule, we have gotten to the place where we just believe, oh, it's our people just doing whatever wrongs that are being done, as opposed to understanding that there's a puppet master or mistress somewhere that is. And so I do think that we shouldn't just brush away this argument that keeps popping up about, well, weren't there some African chiefs that were involved? I think that what we need to do is face that head on, and at the same time, tell the stories that they won't tell, which is the number of African kings and chiefs who fought back. The ones who were killed, the ones who were committed suicide, the ones who were exiled. There are so many stories of how we fought back. And so the fact that today you have some women, for instance, in the United States of America, who go along with patriarchy does not make patriarchy good, does not excuse the evils and the oppression of patriarchy, does not mean that all women have bought into it. So the fact, so even if you can identify a few leaders who sometimes were being coerced through what they called gunboat diplomacy, who in other ways were being told, if you don't, look at the story of Nzinga. Some people call her Njinga. If you don't capture and sell some people to us, this is what we're going to do to you. There were a lot. It's very nuanced. The bottom line is we have an obligation to study so that we're not so easily taken in by these lies. And then we have to ask ourselves, why is this man writing this book now? What is his goal? And Britain, are you denying how much you made from colonialism?
His basic premise, which is, Britain doesn't really have to answer for much, is, disparaged by even during, during the George Floyd protest. Part of the revelations here was the Lloyds of London, which happened to be the chief maritime insurers of all times, came out and told you they basically insured all the slave ships. So if a corporation is saying that, what is your grounds for what you're pushing back upon? You're just pushing back upon the language. The facts do not support.
They're really afraid that they could be bankrupted. That's all.
Yeah.
Because there is a case to be made, and this whole white people are so much smarter and have built the whole civilization, to hear Stephen Miller say it, when we start peeling back the layers and realizing, no, it was the labor, intelligence, and resources from the quote-unquote global south that actually propped you all up. And that is why France is beginning to feel the impact economically of all these African nations saying, you're not going to ride on us backs anymore.
Correct.
It's really fear. Really fear.
Speaking of fear, and again, the impact of so-called colonialism, I shouldn't say so-called, impact of colonialism and now neocolonialism, we go to our final article for today, which is from the German organization Deutsche Welle, and it reads, Tanzania Maasai people facing government pressure to leave. I would read a part of that and, I was sort of taken aback at the level of disparateness here. So it says, Tanzania authorities have pushed Maasai relocation since 2022, sparking condemnation from rights groups with election nearing, with pressure to shift or deepen. Well, pressure shift or deepen, it says. And it goes further. The Maasai, an ethnic group indigenous to southern Kenya and northern Tanzania, have grazed livestock around Tanzania Lake Natron for years, for generations. Park rangers from the Tanzania Wildlife Management Authority, TAWA, have been accused of confiscating Maasai cattle, charging unofficial fees, and enforcing new restrictions. Measures, the Maasai said, threaten their survival. But this is the part that jumped out at me. We were never consulted about turning Lake Natron into a games reserve, Dowdy said.
The land is where our livestock graze, and without it, our family cannot survive. Your initial take before I come back to it.
So one of the reasons it's important, again, to study history is because then you can see the patterns. And if you don't understand the history, then it's easy to just let things happen again. So as I read this story, I was also thinking about the Native Americans. A majority of states in the United States of America are actually named after the indigenous owners of this land. And how when the white people could not fairly fight and kill off the Native Americans, indigenous people, and their smallpox blankets didn't kill enough people and so on and so forth, they realized that they depended on the buffalo for their livelihood, for meat, for clothing. They used the dung of the buffalo to heat their homes, for building homes, for every part of the buffalo, from
the horns,
the hair to the horn to the everything,
the hooves,
was used. And you want to talk about sustainable development. And so what did they do, these colonizers?
They
attacked the buffalo. They killed off, they just massacred the buffalo, thereby creating a situation where the indigenous people could not live in those areas. And then it's easier to then force them onto so-called reservations so that you can continue your capitalist venture here. So that's what came to mind as I was reading this story. And then, of course, as you said, you go down and you're like, why? Because I'm like, what is motivating this? What have these people done? Like, why are you bothering them? Why are you taking their cattle? Why are you fining them? With which money are they supposed to pay? And it's like, oh, we want a game reserve.
Reserve. Can you imagine?
So
for whom?
This for us to now start talking about our tourism
going
industry.
On safari. Yeah.
And, we want to get tourists to come and go on safaris. And so that is worth eliminating these people from their land.
Yeah.
And them not having a say. So again, to the point we made earlier, you're coming to the United Nations and you're saying we should have a say. We should have a seat at the table. But in our own countries,
you're denying the say.
You are silencing people. You're going to move them 600 kilometers away. Their ancestors are buried in this land. Climate is the kind of food that grows even similar wherever it is you're moving them to. But they have no say whatsoever because you want a game reserve. And then the thing is, does it always have to be either or? If the notion of a game reserve, and I'm being as generous as I can be, is to preserve the environment and to ensure that the animals don't go extinct and so on and so forth, is there no way to accomplish that while maintaining the culture of a people, their way of life, of living?
That have lived with the same animals.
That have lived with the same, that can actually teach you a thing or two or three or four or five
about
or six.
The animals.
So again, African leaders cannot listen how the West lives. And yes, I live in the West. But if what are we now? 9 billion people on the face of the earth?
7.
Is it 7?
Yeah. I think 7. Yes, 7.
Okay, whatever billion we are, if the entire world attempted to live the way people in the West live, the climate that we're talking about will collapse in about 2 years. We can't even sustain it for that long. How we live is not sustainable. We're all going to have to make some changes. This idea of you should have electricity 24 hours a day and it's fossil fuel, and you have in one house 20 devices because you have a TV in every room and a this and a this and a that. It is not, the environment cannot sustain it. So why not talk with these people and have a better understanding on how they've lived and preserve that? Yes, we can see what makes sense in terms of preserving the land without harming the original caretakers of this land. Instead, we keep being led by these Western ideas of development, and we completely, when we say Black Lives Matter, do Black Lives matter?
But do
the Maasai lives matter?
Here's the irony in that article. They said the place is supposed to be a World Heritage Site. What is the point of having a heritage site when the people who have lived there, whose heritage is the one you want to showcase, have been disappeared?
Yeah, we're just going to put up a museum.
I mean, sometimes you have to laugh when you read these articles. It's like, what are you doing? Don't you understand what it is you're doing to your people? And when I use the term neocolonialism, these are people who are supposed to be free from the yoke of colonialism, but yet they're still carrying on what Aikwama would describe as being the default of being the foreign interpreters within our space. And he begs the question that for how long would Africa continue to yield to the whims of the West? I mean, I have nothing against someone wanting to come there and take pictures of animals, but you don't do it to the detriment of the people who live there. You don't.
Well, you do it. You do if you don't value yourself. If you see yourself as expendable as they see you.
Yes. And with that story, we've come to the end of another episode of African News Review. The good comrade had to leave because study calls. And sister, any final thoughts?
These are very important times. Like probably every generation has said that, but we are really at a place where any one thing could tip us one way or tip us in a different way. So while we look at what is happening globally, while we look at what nation leaders are doing or not doing, what I would say is that each of us needs to look at what we can individually do, what we have control of. What's your carbon footprint? What are you doing to build up your own communities where you are? What are you doing to take care of yourself and build yourself up as well?
Yeah.
And how are you beginning to wean yourself off of capitalism and this sense that the way of the West is the only way to go?
Yeah, powerful. And also, I'd just like to add to that, we also have to understand that just because we can sometimes doesn't mean we should. And what do I mean by that? You walk past something, you want to have it, but do you need it? Needs and wants are two different things. So again, the more one engages with that aspect of one's life, you find that you're actually much more richer than you think. And I don't mean just rich because you have the resources. You're rich mentally because philosophically you are content. And content you cannot buy. You cannot buy. So that said, the sister and I would be looking at the lives and times of Abe Lincoln this Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And and that's on Women and Resistance. Again, Abe Lincoln. So some of you might know her and some not, but come along all the same. You might learn something different. And we also have to give goodbyes to one of our previous guests, Sister Asata Olugbala Shakur, who joined the ancestors this week. And Sister, I'll give the word to you.
In my spirit, I just see that radiant smile of hers. And I see her dancing. Wow, what a revolutionary. And they never got her. She absolutely $2 million on her head, and she died free. And I know that she does not want us crying. She wants us fighting back. And she wants us to understand that this system cannot be reformed. The system has to be dismantled. She was unequivocal about that. But I just feel her spirit is so strong and so pure and so joyous at this time. And I'm so grateful that we had a chance to celebrate her, pay homage to her, even while she was living. Probably never saw it herself, but others did, others will. Asata Shakur is an ancestor that you want to keep on your lips. Yes.
And also, one of the stuff I want to mention in the United Nations speech was the fact that all the African leaders advocated for Cuba, that the embargo should be lifted.
Yes, they did. I'm glad you raised that. Yes.
And so, being that said, I think it's incumbent on us to actually understand what a tiny island that is just 50 nautical miles from
10 million people
from Florida, how they have been so dogged and revolutionary. There is a book I was reading a couple of years ago. It's titled The Media War Against Cuba. It's written by Kit Bollender. It's actually a very brilliant book, which goes into how even your new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, how his family. It's a brilliant. This is the book. It's titled
How His Family Did What?
How his family played on the so-called hatred of Cuba to ingratiate himself in the American system. And if you scratch beneath the surface, it's devoid of meaning. And again,
but basically what the leaders at the UN were mentioning is it isn't just the embargo against Cuba by the United States, is the fact that they are going after anybody and any entity that tries to do business in any way with Cuba, from airlines to banks, financial institutions. So basically it's like, fine, I can't break your will, but I'm going to starve you of all the resources I can. And anybody who attempts to, because Cuba is, they send firefighters, they send physicians, they send all kinds of medical personnel. They train other, South Africa talked about this. They train other revolutionaries, if you will.
Yeah, they
have a lot to offer. Yes.
They were pivotal to South Africa becoming an independent country.
Absolutely.
Defeating the UNITA rebels at the Battle of Kuno Carnival, and then that was 1978, and subsequently Mandela would be released, and before you know it, Cyril Ramaphosa would be,
President.
So
it's been about 60 years of trying to starve this nation, keeping them cut off from technological advances and so on and so forth. And for what?
Because they didn't buy into capitalism.
Yes, and so calling them a terrorist state, but as Mia Motley pointed out, that is only the U.S. What terrorism have they sponsored? So plenty of work to be done. Yeah, for those of you who want to be revolutionaries, there's a lot of work to be done. So get to work. Don't just have a name.
Start reading. Read, and read some more. So yeah, until Wednesday when we'll come together again on Women and Resistance, the lives and times of Abe Lincoln. It's good night from me and sister.
Thank you again. Santa Sana, everyone. Let's fight on.
Yeah, good night and good night.
That's a wrap for this week on the African News Review podcast. We hope you are leaving with a clearer, more truthful picture of Africa. Remember, every story has another side, and we're here to uncover it. Don't forget to join us next Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we continue to challenge the narratives and reclaim Africa's voice. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeing Africa for what it truly is.